Aung San Suu Kyi is a name that transcends borders and time. As the daughter of Myanmar's independence hero, Aung San, she has emerged as one of the most influential figures in the modern history of Myanmar, and indeed, the world. But what truly sets her apart from other political leaders is not just her involvement in her nation's turbulent struggle for democracy, but her deep-rooted reliance on Buddhist principles, compassion, karuna, and nonviolence, ahimsa. These are not mere philosophical abstractions for her but the very lifeblood of her political strategy. It is astonishing to consider how these ideals helped her not only rally the Burmese people but also capture the imagination of people worldwide. How does one manage to combine spirituality with political strategy? What does it take to persist for decades in the face of relentless opposition, never yielding to the temptation of anger or hatred? In a land where Buddhism forms the cultural backbone, Suu Kyi's reliance on these spiritual values created an undeniable moral authority. This essay delves into her early life, how Buddhist teachings shaped her, the challenges she faced in applying these values to real-world politics, and, importantly, how the world sees her today after recent controversies. This journey is not just about political leadership, but the intersection of moral principles and practical governance. Can these two ever truly coexist in the turbulent world of politics? Early life, shaped by legacy and Buddhism, Aung San Suu Kyi was born in 1945 into a political legacy that few can imagine. Her father, General Aung San, is remembered as the father of Burmese independence. Tragically, he was assassinated in 1947, when Suu Kyi was only 2 years old. Can you imagine growing up under the weight of such a profound loss, knowing your father had given his life for the freedom of your country? The impact of this early tragedy is evident in Suu Kyi's sense of duty and connection to her father's dream of a free and democratic Myanmar. While her father's legacy might have laid the groundwork for her political involvement, it was Buddhism that shaped her worldview. Growing up in Burma, where Theravada Buddhism is deeply interwoven into the cultural and social fabric, Suu Kyi was exposed to Buddhist teachings from an early age. Compassion, nonviolence, and selflessness were not just concepts for her, they were lived experiences. It is clear that these values were embedded in her consciousness long before she entered the political arena. Suu Kyi spent much of her early life abroad, receiving a Western education that broadened her understanding of the world. She studied at Oxford University, where she met her future husband, Michael Eris, and spent significant time in India and the UK. Yet even as she lived far from her homeland, the call of Myanmar and the teachings of Buddhism never left her. Despite her physical distance from the Burmese people, Suu Kyi remained spiritually and emotionally connected to her country's struggles. In many ways, this period of distance allowed her to see the situation in Myanmar with greater clarity and a global perspective, which would later prove invaluable. But how did a woman who spent so many years abroad come to represent the hopes of an entire nation? The answer lies not just in her family legacy, but in her ability to channel the Buddhist values of compassion, patience, and moral fortitude into her leadership. The lessons she absorbed from her spiritual upbringing became the backbone of her political ideology, guiding her through every obstacle. The 1988 uprising, A Nation's Call. In 1988, Aung San Suu Kyi returned to Myanmar to care for her ailing mother. Little did she know that this would mark the beginning of her political journey. Upon her arrival, the country was in turmoil. Years of military rule had plunged Myanmar into economic collapse and isolation, sparking widespread protests across the country. Thousands of students, monks, and ordinary citizens took to the streets to demand change. It was a moment of unprecedented national unity, and the people were calling for a leader. Suu Kyi, though initially reluctant to take on a political role, was thrust into the center of this movement. Can you imagine the weight of that moment, the daughter of Aung San, Myanmar's greatest hero, returning at a time of crisis? The people saw in her a leader who could embody the legacy of her father while also bringing the moral clarity of Buddhist teachings to the political struggle. She was more than just a political figure, she was a symbol of hope and righteousness. It was during this period that Suu Kyi made one of her most iconic speeches at the Shwedagon Pagoda, one of the most sacred Buddhist sites in Myanmar. Standing before tens of thousands of people, she announced her commitment to the pro-democracy movement. But what set her apart was not just her call for political reform, it was the way she framed this struggle within the context of Buddhist ethics. She spoke not only of the need for democratic change but also of the importance of compassion, nonviolence, and moral integrity. Her words resonated deeply with the Burmese people, who saw in her not just a political leader but a moral authority. In that moment, Aung San Suu Kyi became the face of the pro-democracy movement, and her political journey began in earnest. She would soon realize, however, that the path ahead would be fraught with immense challenges, not least of which was the question, how does one balance the moral imperatives of compassion and nonviolence with the brutal realities of political power? Compassion, a revolutionary principle. One of the most remarkable aspects of Suu Kyi's leadership is her profound reliance on compassion, or karuna, as the cornerstone of her political philosophy. In Theravada Buddhism, compassion is one of the four sublime states, Brahmavihara, alongside loving-kindness, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. But for Suu Kyi, compassion was more than a personal virtue, it was a political strategy. Imagine trying to lead a movement against one of the most repressive military regimes in the world, and your primary weapon is not guns, not violence, but compassion. It seems almost impossible, doesn't it? Yet, Suu Kyi firmly believed that the Burmese people's suffering under military rule could only be alleviated through compassionate leadership. This was not just an emotional appeal, it was a deeply strategic one. For Suu Kyi, compassion extended even to her enemies. This is perhaps one of the most striking aspects of her leadership. She believed that the military rulers themselves were suffering from ignorance and delusion. In line with Buddhist teachings, she viewed them not as evil but as lost souls who needed to be guided back to the path of righteousness. Can you imagine the moral courage it takes to view your oppressors with compassion? In a world where political movements often thrive on anger and revenge, Suu Kyi's approach was revolutionary. Her commitment to compassion also earned her international recognition. In 1991, while still under house arrest, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In her acceptance speech, delivered by her son, she emphasized the role of kindness and compassion in building a better world. She spoke of how genuine compassion must transcend all barriers, whether racial, religious, or political. It was a powerful message, and it resonated deeply with people around the world. But, as we will see later, the complexities of political leadership would eventually test her ability to hold on to these ideals. Nonviolence, the heart of her strategy. If compassion was the moral foundation of Suu Kyi's leadership, nonviolence was its strategic core. The principle of ahimsa, or nonviolence, is central to many Eastern religions, including Buddhism. Suu Kyi's commitment to nonviolence was inspired not only by Buddhist teachings but also by the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi, who led India's struggle for independence using nonviolent civil disobedience. Gandhi's influence on Suu Kyi is unmistakable. Like Gandhi, she believed that nonviolence was not only a moral imperative but also a practical strategy for achieving political change. She argued that violence would only serve to legitimize the military's repressive tactics, whereas peaceful resistance would expose the moral bankruptcy of the junta. In a country where the military had ruled with an iron fist for decades, this was a bold and radical approach. But can you imagine how difficult it must have been to maintain this commitment to nonviolence in the face of extreme provocation? Throughout her political career, Suu Kyi's supporters were subjected to imprisonment, torture, and even death. Yet she never wavered in her belief that violence would only lead to more suffering. Her steadfast commitment to nonviolence won her the admiration of people around the world and galvanized international support for the Burmese pro-democracy movement. At the same time, Suu Kyi's nonviolent approach was not without its critics. Some within the pro-democracy movement, particularly younger activists, grew frustrated with the slow pace of change and the continued brutality of the military regime. They argued that armed resistance was the only way to overthrow the junta. Yet Suu Kyi remained firm in her conviction that violence would only lead to more suffering and that true peace could only be achieved through dialogue and reconciliation. This unwavering commitment to non-violence became one of the defining characteristics of her leadership and solidified her position as a global icon of peaceful resistance. The role of Buddhist monks, moral and spiritual authority, the role of Buddhist monks and the Sangha, the monastic community, in Myanmar's pro-democracy movement cannot be overstated. In Myanmar, monks hold a special place in society as moral and spiritual leaders. Their involvement in political movements has historically lent legitimacy to these causes, and the pro-democracy movement was no exception. The involvement of monks in Myanmar's pro-democracy struggle underscored the deep connection between Buddhism and the quest for justice in the country. During the 1988 uprising, Buddhist monks joined the protests in large numbers, providing not just moral legitimacy but also protection for civilians. It was a powerful moment. Monks, revered by society for their spiritual wisdom, were standing alongside ordinary citizens, facing the brutal military forces. Their participation sent a clear message that the pro-democracy movement was not just a political rebellion but a moral and spiritual cause rooted in the country's core values. The monks' involvement symbolized that this was a righteous struggle against an immoral regime, and their presence emboldened the people. Aung San Suu Kyi's relationship with the Sangha was one of mutual respect. She frequently invoked Buddhist teachings in her speeches, drawing on themes of compassion, non-violence, and moral responsibility. The monks saw in her a leader who embodied the highest ideals of Buddhism. And in turn, their support lent her movement an unshakable moral foundation. This partnership was vital in sustaining the movement, especially in times of despair when the military crackdown seemed insurmountable. The involvement of the monks reached its peak during the 2007 Saffron Revolution. In response to rising fuel prices and the economic mismanagement of the military junta, thousands of monks took to the streets in peaceful protests. Dressed in their saffron robes, they became a symbol of purity, standing against the corruption and brutality of the regime. The sight of these monks peacefully marching through the streets was a powerful image that resonated not just within Myanmar but across the world. The Saffron Revolution, though brutally suppressed, was a turning point in Myanmar's pro-democracy movement and demonstrated the enduring connection between Buddhism and the fight for justice. Aung San Suu Kyi's deep connection with the Buddhist monks and their shared commitment to non-violence and compassion reinforced her position as a moral leader. Yet, while the monks' involvement provided crucial support, it also highlighted the challenges of applying spiritual principles to the practical realities of political leadership. As the movement gained momentum, Suu Kyi was increasingly faced with the question, could compassion and non-violence truly bring about political change in a country ruled by a brutal military regime? House arrest, the test of spiritual and moral endurance. Perhaps one of the most defining features of Aung San Suu Kyi's life is the long periods of house arrest she endured. Over the course of 2 decades, Suu Kyi spent more than 15 years in confinement, cut off from the outside world, her family, and her political supporters. It was a profound test of her Buddhist principles of patience, endurance, and non-violence. How does one remain committed to non-violence when locked away, knowing your people are suffering? How does one not succumb to anger or despair? In Buddhism, patience and forbearance are considered virtues, particularly in the face of adversity. Suu Kyi's time under house arrest was the ultimate test of these principles. She understood that personal suffering, when endured with grace, could serve a higher purpose. Her willingness to sacrifice her personal freedom for the greater good of Myanmar became a powerful symbol of her moral strength and commitment to the Buddhist path. During her house arrest, Suu Kyi deepened her spiritual practice. Meditation became not only a tool for personal resilience but also a way to maintain her focus on the broader struggle for democracy. She used this time to reflect on her principles and strengthen her resolve. In many ways, her house arrest became a form of silent protest, a demonstration of her refusal to be broken by the regime, even when physically confined. For the people of Myanmar, Suu Kyi's house arrest became a symbol of her unwavering commitment to their cause. Many began to see her as a bodhisattva-like figure, someone who had willingly accepted suffering in order to alleviate the suffering of others. Her endurance became a source of inspiration, not just for the Burmese people but for the global community. While the military sought to silence her by isolating her, they only amplified her voice and increased her influence. Yet, despite her spiritual and moral fortitude, the long years of house arrest were not without challenges. Suu Kyi was often isolated from the political developments taking place in Myanmar, and her absence created difficulties for the pro-democracy movement. Without her physical presence, the movement struggled to maintain momentum. Still, her moral authority remained intact, and when she was finally released, the world once again turned its attention to Myanmar, hoping that this marked the beginning of real political change. The Nobel Peace Prize, international recognition and the weight of expectations. In 1991, Aung San Suu Kyi was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her nonviolent struggle for democracy and human rights. The Nobel Committee described her as an outstanding example of the power of the powerless, highlighting her commitment to peace and justice. The award brought international attention to Myanmar's struggle for democracy and elevated Suu Kyi to the status of a global icon of peaceful resistance. The Nobel Peace Prize was not just a recognition of her leadership but also a symbol of hope for the Burmese people. It sent a message to the military regime that the world was watching, and it galvanized international support for the pro-democracy movement. Suu Kyi's image as a Nobel laureate further solidified her position as a moral leader, not just in Myanmar but globally. However, with the Nobel Peace Prize came immense expectations. The international community looked to Suu Kyi as a beacon of hope and a symbol of the power of non-violent resistance. Her image as a Nobel Peace Prize winner created a narrative of moral purity and uncompromising integrity. But as we will explore later, these expectations would become a double-edged sword as Suu Kyi faced the complexities of real-world political leadership. The 2010 elections, a glimmer of hope. After years of international pressure and internal unrest, the military regime in Myanmar announced plans for a transition to a quasi-civilian government in 2010. While the elections that followed were far from free or fair, they marked a significant turning point in Myanmar's political landscape. The military, while still retaining significant control, began to loosen its grip on power, setting the stage for Aung San Suu Kyi's release from house arrest. In November 2010, just days after the elections, Suu Kyi was finally freed. Her release was met with jubilation both in Myanmar and around the world. It was a moment of triumph for the pro-democracy movement and a glimmer of hope that political reform might finally be within reach. Yet, as Suu Kyi re-entered the political arena, she faced a new set of challenges. The political landscape had changed dramatically during her years of confinement. The military still held significant power, and the transition to democracy was far from complete. Suu Kyi's release was a symbolic victory, but the path to real political change remained uncertain. How would she navigate this new terrain? How could she balance her moral principles with the practical realities of governance in a country still under the shadow of military rule? Suu Kyi, however, remained committed to her principles of nonviolence and dialogue. Rather than confronting the military head-on, she chose to work within the system, believing that gradual reform was the only way to achieve lasting change. This approach, though criticized by some as too cautious, reflected her deep belief in the Buddhist principle of the middle way, a balanced approach that avoids extremes and seeks to bring about change through peaceful means. The NLD's historic victory in 2015. In 2015, Myanmar held its first relatively free and fair elections in decades. The National League for Democracy, NLD, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, won a landslide victory, securing a majority in both houses of parliament. It was a historic moment for Myanmar and for Suu Kyi personally. After decades of struggle, she and the NLD had finally achieved a political breakthrough. However, despite the NLD's electoral success, Suu Kyi was barred from becoming president due to a clause in the military-drafted constitution that prohibited anyone with foreign family members from holding the office. This clause had been specifically included to prevent Suu Kyi, whose two sons hold British citizenship, from assuming the presidency. Undeterred, Suu Kyi took on the newly created role of state councillor, effectively becoming the de facto leader of the country. Her victory was seen as a major step forward for democracy in Myanmar. But it also presented new challenges. How would she govern a country with deep-seated ethnic conflicts, a powerful military, and fragile democratic institutions? Could her moral authority and Buddhist principles guide her through the complexities of political leadership? The Rohingya crisis, a controversial chapter. Despite her long-standing reputation as a champion of human rights, Aung San Suu Kyi's leadership has not been without controversy, particularly in relation to the Rohingya crisis. In 2017, Myanmar's military launched a brutal crackdown on the Rohingya Muslim minority in the Rakhine state, leading to widespread violence, displacement, and accusations of genocide. More than 700,000 Rohingya fled to neighboring Bangladesh, where they remain in refugee camps to this day. Suu Kyi's response to the crisis shocked many of her international supporters. While she was not directly responsible for the military's actions, her government was accused of turning a blind eye to the atrocities and failing to speak out against the military's abuses. In some cases, Suu Kyi appeared to defend the military's actions, arguing that the situation was more complex than it appeared and that the international community was misrepresenting the facts. This crisis has significantly tarnished Suu Kyi's international reputation. Many human rights organizations, as well as her former supporters, have called for her Nobel Peace Prize to be revoked. How could a leader who once symbolized compassion and nonviolence fail to speak out against such violence and suffering? The Rohingya crisis has raised difficult questions about the limits of Suu Kyi's leadership and the challenges of applying Buddhist principles in the harsh realities of political governance. Some defenders of Suu Kyi argue that her hands were tied by the delicate power-sharing arrangement with the military, which still holds significant influence in Myanmar's political system. They contend that Suu Kyi was walking a tightrope, trying to navigate the complex realities of governance in a country with deep ethnic tensions and a powerful military. Nevertheless, the Rohingya crisis remains a dark chapter in her legacy, and it has cast a shadow over her once unassailable moral authority. The limits of idealism, balancing Buddhist principles with political realities. The Rohingya crisis highlights the complexities and limitations of applying Buddhist principles in the harsh realities of political leadership. Aung San Suu Kyi's long-standing commitment to compassion and non-violence has been called into question, as her government's handling of the crisis seemed to contradict the very ideals she had championed for so many years. However, it is important to recognize that Suu Kyi's political career has always been marked by the tension between idealism and pragmatism. While she has consistently advocated for Buddhist principles in her leadership, she has also had to contend with the difficult realities of governing a deeply divided country, where ethnic and religious tensions run high, and where the military retains significant control. In many ways, Suu Kyi's leadership reflects the Buddhist teaching of the middle way, which advocates for a balanced approach that avoids extremes. Throughout her political career, Suu Kyi has tried to balance her commitment to moral principles with the practical need to achieve political change. This balancing act has not always been easy, and the Rohingya crisis serves as a reminder of the challenges that come with applying spiritual ideals to the complex world of politics. Conclusion: a complex legacy. Aung San Suu Kyi's legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. She is a leader who has inspired millions with her unwavering commitment to non-violence, compassion, and democracy, yet her handling of the Rohingya crisis has raised difficult questions about the limits of her leadership and the challenges of governing in a deeply divided country. Despite these controversies, Suu Kyi remains a towering figure in Myanmar's history and a symbol of the power of peaceful resistance. Her integration of Buddhist principles into her political philosophy has left a lasting impact on Myanmar's pro-democracy movement, and her personal sacrifices have made her a moral icon for people around the world. At the same time, her political career serves as a reminder of the complexities of leadership, particularly in a country as diverse and troubled as Myanmar. Balancing idealism with pragmatism, and moral principles with political realities, is a challenge that every leader must face. For Aung San Suu Kyi, this balance has defined her life and her legacy.